Welcome to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Gary Lewis from Bexley PD. He has almost 35 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Lewis. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. There are a few things that you said in our initial talk that I thought were really interesting and a different perspective. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with our listeners today. But before we do that, I was hoping that you could give us a little bit of background.
Sure, absolutely. Bexley, Ohio is a suburban community directly east of Columbus. We are surrounded thereof. We have approximately just less than 20,000 that we serve. Law enforcement sworn agency, about 35 sworn. As you mentioned, it's been nearly 35 years I've been in this profession. Spent over 20 years with the Ohio State Highway Patrol, retired, went and worked at the Ohio State University for a few years, got back into law enforcement, spent some time up in Cleveland at Cleveland State University, and then the University of Louisville there in Louisville, Kentucky, and was there during the George Floyd and more specifically Breonna Taylor. And
Mm.
so looking at the dynamics and the impact of what that did, not only in the country, but there with local leadership and our police department.
Thank you. And did you always know that you wanted to be in law enforcement, or what drew you to this career path?
I am not an individual that is going to tell you that at the young age of 5 or 6, I knew that this is what I was going to do. Behind me, there's a photograph of a gentleman by the name of Gilbert Jones. And Gilbert Jones was the second African American to ever join the Ohio State Highway Patrol. He did it in 1965. I had no idea of Gilbert Jones and his legacy and the impact, but I had went to art college, got an art degree, and was working in advertising. And the company I was working for had been bought out, and I started looking for some other opportunities. Had a family member, my uncle, who was a Columbus detective, suggest that I do composite sketch artist for law enforcement. Thought, wow, that's a great fit. So I applied a couple of law enforcement agencies here in Central Ohio and stopped by the Highway Patrol Academy. Got to meet then Captain Jones, and he challenged me into becoming an Ohio State Trooper. And I said, I have no desire to become a state trooper. And he basically said, look, you couldn't meet our standards, and literally challenged me to do it. During that conversation, he asked where I was from. I shared I was from Columbus, and he asked about my family. When I told him who my grandfather was, he pushed over the desktop phone back in 1990 and had me call my grandfather and said, hey, somebody wants to talk to you. They got on the phone and they exchanged the conversation. He handed the phone back to me, and my grandfather said, fill out the application, and hung up the phone. And I thought, what is going on? So on the other side of that table, Captain Jones said, you got to fill out the app, don't you? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, you don't know this, but your grandfather and my eldest brother were the best of friends who grew up here in the city.
Wow.
And so just that connection, he became just an absolute vital role model, not only to myself, but to so many other law enforcement officers within the patrol. He retired after about 33 years in the Highway Patrol. Then he joined the Franklin County Sheriff's Office and was a leader there with their agency for many years. We unfortunately lost him to cancer about 4 years ago. And so I keep memory and his image here on my desk every day to think about the impact of what he did for me and so many others.
Wow, I love that story. The thing that was going in my head is legacy and how
Yes.
his legacy still lives on through you and everyone who he impacted throughout his career and his life. And I think it's a reminder to everyone that you have the ability to do great things and to inspire other people. And I really appreciate that story. You didn't tell me that offline. That's amazing. I love that he used like reverse psychology on you too. He's like, you couldn't do it, even if you
Oh,
tried. And you're
absolutely.
like, I'm gonna prove it to you.
Yes. Yes, you know, and I think that it's separate but related as we are in a time with law enforcement where recruitment and retention is such a challenge.
Mm,
And how do we find ways to motivate this generation? You know, here we are, literally 35 years removed, and it's a different mechanism to try to do that. And oftentimes I say that we in this profession have to change the narrative. We have to change how we are thinking, how we're approaching it. And a lot of it starts it, and this is full circle to what our conversation will be about this afternoon. But when we go home and we then speak negativity about our agency, we speak negativity about our professioncy, we speak negativity about the impact, the young people, our children who are watching us, we're their first heroes. They're
mm.
being impacted and influenced. And if we're not creating the next generation of future leaders from within our own homes, our own communities, we have to take some ownership and some responsibility in changing that narrative. And so I think to your point, what Captain Jones, he ended up retiring as lieutenant colonel. What he was effectively able to do was to tap in to that part of my generation who looked at that competitive spirit, that nature, and took it very differently. So I think that we have a chance to change that narrative in how we recruit, tomorrow's leaders.
I really love that perspective of understanding how to communicate to other generations in a way that they're going to respond. And that's a sign of leadership. That's a leadership skill, right? To be able to go to different people and figure out what motivates them and what inspires them and what's going to encourage action in them. And that is not an easy skill. That is a very developed, learned skill to have, but everyone has the ability to do that through practice and awareness, right? If you can really try to identify those things, I think that makes you a great leader.
It does, and I think that, in our profession, we have to continue to acquiesce to a changing society
Mm,
and that communicating face to face is different when this generation is much more geared behind a keyboard or an iPad or a cell phone than they are in having a crucial conversation and tough conversations face to face and how you can use that and change that. It's very visually stimulated with the images that are coming across on cell phones as opposed to just being able to stop and observe and see things very differently. And so I do think that, I also credit a lot of just my thought process in being an art major and being able to look at things very differently. I talk about three-dimensional perspective often, that sometimes we are so two-dimensional that we don't see things at every level in that three-dimensional light and that opportunity. So I think that we as leaders have a responsibility. Take a step back, look at this, evaluate it, and look at it very differently, especially from really this next generation of young people. It's so different in
mm.
how they're approaching. It is so different in how they're parenting. It's so different in how they're policing. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
Yeah. Can you give an example of that third dimension? I'm really interested to hear your perspective on maybe like what does two-dimensional look like and what is that added layer that gives it three dimensions?
Yeah, so oftentimes when I'm mentoring or the development of leaders here, I talk about what is that problem, what is the core, and how would you approach that?
Mm,
And what are you not seeing? What's that blind spot? What is it that you're not forecasting and projecting the adverse impact of that decision and how this may have multiple layers as opposed to what's directly in front of you. Oftentimes, we're so accustomed, especially in this space, make a decision, deal with the consequence, as opposed to anticipating the consequence. How do we manage and mitigate that? What are the adverse impacts and effects? And that's how we should lead, manage, and supervise, looking at it from all angles.
mm.
So oftentimes it's not just that one person. How does that have that expanded viewpoint to where it could really impact so many others?
What you said too, I think relates to wellness as well. I think that you could apply that same concept to, what are your blind spots when it comes to your own personal wellness? When you self-assess, because a lot of times we're not going to see some of the things that maybe other people see. And that's why we always hear that advice of have people who are going to keep you in check, because you might not notice if you are becoming more negative and having, a negative mindset. You might not notice if you're maybe escaping or numbing because you're not dealing with some of the things that you should be dealing with, and being a little bit more proactive. And I like that you said that, like, trying to get in front of the consequence, right? So it's like, when in the context of wellness as well, it's like, how can you be a little bit more proactive? How can you understand that, your profession especially is so challenging, and there's cumulative stress that you're going to go through over 30 plus years of your life. And we all know a lot of those outcomes, right? We know the stats, we know the numbers, we know that this can end in mental health issues, this can end in alcohol, this can end in divorce, this can, there's all the different things, right? So how can you try to get in front of that before it happens? And then how can you have that self-assessment to notice maybe what you're not seeing in yourself that maybe does need a little bit of um, help?
You're absolutely right. And I think what I'm finding is, someone asked me just the other day, how have you managed, how do you cope with what you've dealt with over the years?
Mhm.
I really never thought about it in that context. And I think that many of us have learned to manage it internally, but we've never dealt with it.
Mm.
And I think that was so real for me. And this is just a young lady who, there at City Hall, had asked the question, but it had never been put in that phraseology. And I really took the question serious and thought, there's so many stressors that many of us from all over the country have never truly managed. And I believe that long term, that long after we retire from organizations, the profession, that our bodies still must manage and process that somehow.
Mm.
And so, be that if it is in working out, if it is in finding that mental health, the physical health, finding it in aspects of family and marriage, and how do we cope with all the different things that we've seen. There are many of us who are genetically disposed.
Mhm.
You can, just by age and um, gender, I mean, there are so many things that go into this mixture that you have to be mindful of. And I'm really concerned that long term, even for myself, how am I going to deal with that? One of the things you and I had not shared, talked about, is that I'm a father of five,
Oh,
and my
wow.
children go from age 36 to 33 to 30 to 27 and 6.
Oh, wow.
And so, how I parent from those four older boys, they've all have either currently or served in the United States military. And looking at the four older boys and how I parented then is so different than how I parent the 6-year old now. And what have I learned on this journey? And I think that we have to apply those same types of principles. And when you know better, you do better.
Yeah.
And I think that as I look at my own professional career and think about how we were ultimately basically told, suck it up, deal with it, or pretend that it's not real, that we now are at a place where we can find resources and find outlets to be able to manage stress, to be able to manage crises, to be able to manage the impact of what that death notification does, and being on either side of that notification. And how do we try and deal with that to where we don't go full blown police mode, and are actually humanized to be able to show and express emotion.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the book The Body Keeps the Score?
I have not. But I
So
can tell just the title alone, I would agree.
yeah, and it talks about something that you were explaining earlier, that you think that the body kind of holds on to these things. And it,
Mhm.
it talks a lot about that. And it's a little heady, but I think it's really valuable to like understand what happens physiologically when you go through trauma and stress. And
Mhm.
so maybe if you're ever looking for an audiobook or something, it's helpful to kind of understand. But I agree with you. I think that, I also grew up in an environment where I experienced a lot when I was younger, and I just shoved it down and learned to survive and postured up. And I
Mhm.
didn't have the resources or the education or the knowledge as to how to be able to process those things and to find freedom from those things, because those things weigh you down and they do have an
Mhm.
effect on your relationships, on your perspectives, your perception of the world, how you respond to the world. And for me, like I became really hardened. I became really nasty. I was extremely confrontational. I had no empathy whatsoever. And it wasn't until I started working through all of that stuff through different wellness strategies and resources that I was able to like feel that like weight lifted off of me and realize that like I don't have to live that way. I don't have to have a chip on my shoulder, and I can find freedom from these things, but it takes hard work. And I don't think that anyone wants to be that hardened, jaded person. I don't think anyone wants to have flashbacks or severe anxiety or feel like they need to drink every night in order to fall asleep or, whatever it is. I don't think anyone wants to live that life, but I think to your point, it's how can you have the awareness that this is something that needs some resources or needs to be I don't want to say fix. I don't think fix is the right word, but worked through. And then how do you
Mhm.
have the education and resources to be able to do that so that you can show up as the best version of yourself for your family, for your team, for your community? And I think ultimately everyone wants that longevity, but we just kind of get stuck, especially if you don't know where to go or what to do. I wanted
Yeah.
to circle back to something that you said earlier. You said, if you know better, you do better. And I think that that's really kind of in the context of what I said. If you know, then you're going to be able to do it. It starts with that awareness. I want to go back to earlier in your career. You shared a story with me, April 1993. What happened during that time?
Yeah, so Easter Sunday in April of 1993, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, located in Lucasville, Ohio, had put out the distress call that they were undergoing a full-blown riot. And the Ohio State Highway Patrol was then activated by the governor, and about 80 state troopers from around the state had responded. This lasted for about 2 weeks, very intense high stress. There were 8 lives lost as a result, one also being a prison guard whose life had been taken during this riot. And so the amount of stress that was involved, and we ended up living there inside the prison, staying. And so the irony to that also is that we were there watching the Branch Davidians happen simultaneously. We're in a crisis watching another crisis unfold. And um, you fast forward, you survive that, and the impact of what had taken place, the impact of being inside that facility, of hearing the sounds that you heard, the smells you smelled, seeing the impact, the fire, the destruction. It was very impactful. And so I was very young in my career, and I believe that is shared earlier that when you know better, you do better. And unfortunately, much of the leadership at that time, their mechanism for stress was simply satire, dark humor, or directly just displace it and move on. We were told that you could utilize a sick day, and they had some T-shirts printed up that they offered for you to purchase, and jokingly shared that this was spring break in 1993. And I
Mm,
think that, as I look back, the impact of what that did, and I look back at that generation of law enforcement, that we now know better. And I think that we've done better in the sense that when people have undergone what we've seen in the impact, and I can definitely reflect my time in Louisville during Breonna Taylor, I'm sure with many other communities from Ferguson on, that the officers on the front line have been challenged by their own families,
mm,
spouses, children, community members, neighbors, and it has taken a toll.
yeah.
And I watched directly while in Louisville that happening to many of my officers who had underwent that same type of stress. What Lucasville has taught me is that 32 years later, that I am hopeful that today's law enforcement officer, that many of us who truly wear the badge with such an honor, that many of us have the title, the rank, the structure. That's how we've identified who we are. And I think today's generation of officer has found a much better balance than many of us in that their time off is more critical because they're with family, they're with loved ones, and finding that identity and that time and that space to be with them where, when I was coming up, and I think that especially the generation before, it was all about work. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And, that one day off, they were working a special duty to just make ends meet. And so I think that it's not a work ethic shift, but it's a work focus shift in
Mm.
finding that balance. And I think that I see in my younger officers that they balance significantly better than many of us 30, 35 years ago.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's always going to be different opinions on younger generation. And the one thing I heard from someone say, they said it's always been that way. Every generation has like looked at the next generation and to figure out what they're doing better and also to like razz them a little bit on maybe some of the other things that they do different. But I'm curious to know because I agree with you. I think that you're seeing a shift happen in certain areas throughout your career. All the experiences that you just explained, and I'm sure that there are hundreds of others that have impacted you. What did those teach you about leadership, or how do you think that those influenced the way that you lead today?
A great question. I got to tell you, I think a lot of it for me and my personality, and I think people are hungry for leadership.
Mm,
If no one is willing to follow you, you're just one person out taking a walk.
mm,
So it's important that you lead with integrity, that you lead with strong decision making, and that you're leading from the front. And I think that there were a lot of examples and things that we've seen across the country where leaders have failed us because they failed to make decisions, they failed to lead, and they made decisions that were not in the best interest of the dynamics and the set of circumstances, no matter what that might have been. And your direct reports, your communities, they see that, they sense it, they feel it. That when you're not willing to make those tough decisions. So what it's taught me is don't be afraid to make the best decision at the best time in that moment, and to also seek counsel from others, to have another voice, another perspective. But at the end of the day, it is still my responsibility to make that decision as the leader.
that was a great answer. I have never heard the expression, if no one's willing to follow you, you're just taking a walk. I like that a lot. No, I appreciate that. You were tired and then you came
Mhm.
back. So you have experience in that transition a little bit. Maybe didn't
Yes.
get enough of the career, so you came back for more. Um, you had said that people who retire without the coping mechanisms to deal with the stress. It's costing lives, and we see it, right? We see suicide. We see the stats for life expectancy after retirement. What do you think is still missing for supporting that longevity and helping individuals to transition into retirement?
It's going to sound very simplistic, but I hope this makes sense. What's your why?
Mm,
And I think that many of us who live, eat, and breathe this uniform, this is our why. And when that why is no more, nor is our why. And I think that this next generation has done a much better job in creating their why. And that's the disconnect for many of us in leadership, is that our why is this job.
mm,
Their why differs. And I think that's where that intersect is oftentimes clouded and tough to manage. And we struggle with that. And I think that is you look at retirees who no longer have that why, who turned in their credentials and they've lost access to that secure facility where they have lost that identity as to who they were for 30, 35, 40 years. And all of a sudden now that why is no more. And so I think that there's a disconnect there significantly in what is that purpose? What is driving you? And then the lack of coping mechanisms to be able to live through that. And many of them have suffered through divorce. Children have aged out, moved on, and so then they're just themselves, oftentimes alone. And I don't know that we've done a great job of trying to keep them engaged. One of the ways that I have recognized that is doing a number of things with our retirees, from inviting them to a number of events, engaging them with our active officers, having them be able to come in and share their stories. As we just recently went through our Independence Day, or July 4th. Many of them were in our parade with us, in the cruisers, assisting. So any way that we can keep them engaged and to feel a part of something, I think is a small way to do it. So, um, I am a firm believer that I have a responsibility and I can't impact everyone, but I can impact someone. And if it means one retiree, one active person at a time, then that's my job.
yeah. No, I think you're right. I think the why is so important. And I think that, to your point, like you don't know what you don't know, right? You learn through experiences. And so what you're seeing is that the older generation has a lot of their identity wrapped up into this career. And then, I've had plenty of conversations with retirees that say very similar things where they're like, man, like I gave everything to this career, and then when I retired, I didn't know my family
Mhm.
anymore. And I was scared to be there because they were strangers to me at that point because I had, invested everything into this career. And then no one reached out. And so it felt to them that, they really weren't as valuable as maybe they thought they were, or, they lost the camaraderie, they lost the touch with, the day-to-day excitement of what's going on, and the value that they felt that they had within the organization. And so I think that now you can recognize that and say, okay, as a younger officer, it's so important to connect with your why and to have interests and hobbies outside of the career so that you don't become completely um, immersed in the agency as completely who you are. But I really like that, you're recognizing this and saying, hey, like maybe we can't fix the stuff from before. Like maybe they still feel like their identity is within the organization because we didn't have those proactive measures of trying to encourage outside interest. But what we can do as an organization is make sure that they still feel like they're a part of the team.
Yes. Well, and I'll take it just another level, and just watching the transition of generation, where many of us were told that a lot of the value and worth came with rank.
Mm,
And so you saw this push for rank and file. And the higher the rank, the more important that you become. And I
Mhm.
think we lost sight of what it meant to just be that first line person, that first wave of defense, and placing a high importance on that. But I also think there's, again, that balance because we also now have a generation of folks who are very content in being exactly where they're at, that
Mhm.
have no desire for upward growth or mobility.
Mhm.
And so now we're fighting. You see the talent and the ability in them, but they have no desire because they don't want the responsibilities that that are typically accustomed with that promotion and the changing of shifts and the days off and all the things that go with that. So in a lot of ways we know better and we've done better, but in a lot of ways I think we've lost some of that momentum as well. So
Mhm.
I think that it's going to continue to cycle. It will be a different topic of sorts for the next wave of leaders and generation to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see. We'll see what happens in the next 20 years and we can touch back for a part two. I'm sure you'll be in
Exactly.
retirement by then in 20 years, but um,
Absolutely.
you had said on the phone Superman and Kryptonite. What did you mean by that?
So, I think that many of us have this in this profession that we've had to be that uh, Superman or Superwoman.
Mhm.
And we've had to perform extraordinary things in extraordinary moments. And what is that kryptonite? What is that weakness that you're not prepared for? And I think knowing what that is and learning more about self,
Mhm.
being open to those levels of vulnerabilities and owning that very differently and accepting the fact that we're not Superman, that amazing fictional character is not real and that we are very human. And I
Mhm.
think that it's important to have those tough conversations, that we have that realization. And we have done some super things and super moments, but that doesn't make us super people.
Yeah. I think it's also in the context of, wellness and what we're talking about today too. I think that there's this perception that um, if you're not that super person, that means that you're weak. And I think
Mhm.
that you have to understand that this is a game, a human game. Everyone here is human. Everyone within your team, everyone within your community, we're all flawed. And there's no way. I still love this quote. I heard this from another chief and I just thought it was so perfect. They said, "You can't walk through mud for 30 years and expect your boots not to get dirty." And I was
Mhm.
like, I really liked that because it's so simple and you can just visualize that, right? It's like there's no way that you can get through this career for
Mhm.
30 years, seeing the things that you see on a consistent basis without it affecting you,
Yeah.
and to understand that that does not make you weak, and how can you have those resources in place to make sure that you can continue to do your job and be the best version of yourself and, the quote unquote strongest person of yourself. And I think the strength comes from being able to deal with those things and grow and then keep going, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I think to build on that Chief's um, statement, comment, quote is that we do have to get dirty as leaders. And the key, though, is that when you do, is that you stop and pause and take a moment to clean up,
Mm,
remove the debris, and to move forward from that. Because without that part, you're going to just continue to accumulate more and more mud. And for all those years of more and more of that, it's just going to weigh you down and continue to impact you and your ability to lead.
yeah, I really like that. Thank you for adding to that because you're absolutely right. There's that step in between. You got to be able to clean up a little bit if you're going to keep going.
Yeah.
Um, you had said to me, predictable is preventable. I have a two-part question. One, I would love if you explained that a little bit, but I'm also curious how you think, because this is the number one question that we're getting all the time, is like, how do you get people to be more proactive in their wellness? How do you get them to to pause and to work through the things and to clean up? How do you get them to prioritize themselves so that we can be more preventative?
Yeah. So, I think one of the hard parts, and it goes back full circle to what's my role as a leader? And I think that there is the physical health
Mm.
that many agencies require their officers to have full physicals, if not annual, at least every other year. And we have learned of prostate cancers, of so many diseases and heart issues that this job has brought on us that would have never been detected without that preventative maintenance and that requirement of going through that physical aspect of it.
Yeah.
So I think that if it is going to be prevented, we can predict that when you look at historically, these are the areas where many of this profession have succumbed or had major issues. So I think that's part one. Part two is, again, just being very open and honest and having that requirement. I know there are agencies now that are even requiring the debriefs of the mental health following a crisis or critical incident and forcing them to sit down and really deal and process and manage that moment, short and long term. So I think, again, we've got to be intentional. We have to not allow a lot of the noise that many would receive in almost looking weak or
Mm.
being ridiculed in the shift room, teased, laughed, or taunted. Those behaviors have an impact on that individual and in that room and that aura. So I think that we've got to continue to foster safe spaces that when those who have been involved in critical incidents, that they have that comfort and the confidence to be able to share and express an experience in a way that many of us just didn't have before.
Yeah. Thank you. My final question for you before we wrap for the day. What words of wisdom would you share with someone who is earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
So I'm going to pause because I'm going to turn to my desk and I'm going to do something that I was not prepared to do. But now that you've asked me, I'm going to do this.
Okay.
So you got to give me 1 second.
Okay.
And look at there, it's literally a top of. So this is very personal, very intimate. So this is Gary on it. So this is a card. Gary, in this life, many things will catch your eye. Only a few will catch your heart. Pursue and embrace those few. Your friendship and loyalty has caught my heart. Congratulations on a deserved promotion and good luck in your future endeavors. May this gift trust serve as a continual reminder of what I've tried to find for all what I've given to teach you. If you lead with your heart, your feet will always be in step. Greg. I received this letter in September of 1997. This was given to me by my mentor, who was a sergeant in the Ohio State Highway Patrol. Greg meant the world to me. And what he did was he took a monetary amount and purchased a gift trust for me that would not mature for about 30 years. And he has since passed, and we lost him to pancreatic cancer. In his memory and the impact of what he meant to me, and I keep that letter close because it serves as a reminder that mentoring, developing the next generation, sharing his legacy, his impact meant something to me. And although he physically may not be here, his words live with me. And so I share with all the young people that I mentor today of what that meant. He said, Gary, there's no substitute for loyalty. And that meant something. And so I share it with the audience and continue to share it with those that I come in contact with.
Thank you. I'm gonna have to gather myself. I'm actually getting really emotional about that. That is so beautiful. And I really appreciate you having that level of vulnerability with me and with anyone who's listening to share that. And I think it goes back to what we said before of like legacy living through you and the impact that now you can have on other people because of the people that impacted your life.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you for your words of wisdom. It truly means everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation. Wishing you good luck in future episodes and podcasts. And this is an important platform, one that is long overdue and needed. And so if there's any way that I can help you in the future, please let me know.
Thank you.